Hello everybody, Louis here and let's talk C#. So now it's time to get serious. So it's time we talked about something called data types. So let's talk, we kind of touched it a little bit, but let's talk about it more deeply. First of all, if you created your new project, I hope you remember that inside your main method, which is your entry point for your application, for your code, inside these curly braces, this is where the magic happens. Hope you remember that. Okay, so again, if you want to make your code work, you have to make sure it is typed inside your main method. Okay, so that's how this works. I can't stress this enough because this is very, very, very important. Okay, so let's talk about data types. So in the last video, we talked a little bit about what variables are and how you can create them to store data. So you can think of variables just like, variables are just like boxes, right? So in real life, when you want to store something, say you want to store some old clothes or some old shoes, you have to buy boxes to store these things in, right? However, you have to be careful because if you wanna store some clothes, you can't really buy a shoe box. Maybe it's gonna work for you, but if you want to store, say, your winter coat, a shoe box just won't do the job, right? So when we talk about data types, this is exactly the kind of concern that you have to have. You have to make sure that the data type that you're using is suitable for the kind of information that you would like to save in that variable. Okay, so you have to keep in mind that data is just another word for information. So information comes in many different shapes and sizes. In this course, there are only this is just an introductory course. So the scope of this course, in the scope of this course, there are only a number of things that we'll talk about. And with respect to information and data types, there are certain data types that we have to know, we have to learn. So what I'm gonna say here is that data comes in many different types. So if you think about it, data can either be text, maybe data can be a number. And then there's something else also called Boolean. We're going to talk about Booleans. Let's talk about these other ones first. So when we talk about data, maybe we're talking about text, and in this case, we're talking about strings. Okay? So whenever you have to work with text, you are likely going to work with strings. Okay? Not only strings though, maybe you're talking about just one specific letter or character. In that case, text can also be characters. And in C#, characters are referred to as char. That's another data type. Essentially, it's almost the same thing as a string, except it's only one character. The length is just one. Okay? And that's pretty much it for letters. One thing that we have to know is that strings are always surrounded with double quotes. Okay? And chars are a little different in that sense. Chars are actually surrounded with single quotes. All right? So this is the first one of the first things to learn about the differences between strings and chars. So for strings, double quotes always. For chars, single quotes. All right. And then we have numbers. So numbers, there are many different types that we can use to work with numbers. For this course, we are going to use doubles. Okay. So doubles are, should say that just double. So what doubles are is floating point numbers. That's what they are. Okay. So when you have, for example, if you had to express temperature and you want to say it's 90, let's say 91.2 Fahrenheit outside. Well, it's 91.2, so you have a floating point, and that's why in this case, if you were to write a program to do something with the temperature, then you would have to use a double for that. Or you could. There are other types, but for the purposes of this course, we're keeping things simple. So we're talking about doubles. But you also have integers, right? So those are numbers that are whole numbers. Of course, in math, if you want to be thorough, math has kind of a different definition for whole numbers as compared to integers. But this is not a math class. So we can think of integers as numbers that do not have a floating point, numbers that are whole. In the context of C#, we're talking about ints. Okay? And there are others as well, such as decimals, float, etc. But in this course, we won't talk about them, okay? Maybe we'll talk about decimals later on, but most likely we'll just stick to doubles and integers because, this is an introductory course to C#. We don't have to go that deep into some things. And then we have Boolean. So what is Boolean? So Booleans are essentially a data type that can only hold two values, or I should say one out of two possible values, okay? And that means it can either be true or false, okay? So if it's not true, that means it's false. If it's not false, that means it's true. There is no third option, all right? So these are the data types we're going to be working with. And when working with console applications, we have to be careful because, and this is very important, everything the user types into the console is a string. Okay? So whenever you're prompting the user for some kind of information, it is by default a string, and it is your job as a programmer to convert between different data types and make sure that you have that data, that information in the proper format that you need in order to do whatever it is that you have to do with it. Okay? So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for data types. Well, so how does this conversion thing works? Well, let's take a look. Let's work with some exercise just as an example. Let's say that we have to write a program. I'm gonna type this down, and this is another way to write comments in your code. Instead of using just a double slash, you can just do slash, asterisk, another asterisk, and another slash. That way, everything you type inside the asterisks, in between the asterisks, that is a comment. But the advantage of doing that is because that way you create a comment block. So everything you type in between those asterisks, they are automatically commented out. So you don't have to keep doing the double slash for every single line. Okay? So let's do an example. In this example, what we're gonna do is write a console application that prompts the user for two numbers. Okay, the program should let's say it's multiply. Should multiply them and display the result. Okay, so this is a very simple problem, and this is what we're gonna try and solve, right? Now, in order to solve this, there are many concepts that we already know from the previous video, right? So let's break things down here. So what are the logical steps? Let's talk about that. So the program needs to prompt the user for two numbers. So my first step would be ask the user to input the first number, right? Then I have to grab that number and save it in a variable. I already know how to do that. I learned in the last video, right? So nothing is new up to this point. My next step would be ask the user to input the second number. And again, I'll have to store that number inside another variable. Cool. Now I have both of my inputs in two separate variables. My next step would be to multiply number 1 times number 2. And that will be my result. And what I have to do in my last step is just display the result. That's very simple, and I think we know about 90% of that already. So let's get our hands dirty and solve this problem. Much like last time, we have these list of steps that we can use to address any kind of situation and solve any kind of problem. So step 1, declare variables. Okay, so what are the variables I'm gonna need? So I'm gonna need one variable for the first number and one variable for the second number. So let me say, just so my memory is not the best, so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna say first number so I know what I'm gonna have to have, and I'm gonna have a second number. Okay, now there are a few things that I have to remember. First one, C# needs that semicolon at the end of every statement. So I'll just go ahead and insert my semicolon there. So that part is covered. Awesome. Now, one thing that I have to think about my code is that I have to define the data types properly, because my code will work with these data types, and I have to make sure as a programmer that things will work properly. So the problem says I have to prompt the user for two numbers. It didn't necessarily say that these numbers should be integers or whole numbers. So maybe there's a chance there that my user will actually input a floating point number, maybe 1.5, right? So there's a chance that will happen. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna declare this as a double. There you go, double first number and double second number. Awesome. There you go. So I have my two variables and they're both of double type because I'm expecting to get floating point numbers here. So what happens if my user does not input a floating point number? What if the user inputs integers? That's not a problem in this case because double variables are capable of receiving integers as well. Okay, so this is very important. And I'm gonna say that again. Double variables are capable of working with floating point numbers and also integers. Okay, so you don't have to worry about anything if you're working with double. However, if we were to define these variables as integer type, we would have done something like int first number and int second number. If this is what we're doing, then there is a chance our application will crash because integer variables or int variables are only capable of working with integer numbers. Okay? If I try to save a double or a floating point number inside an int variable, that's not gonna work very well for me, okay? So I have to be careful. So that's why I'm choosing to stick with doubles here. All right. Do I need another variable? Maybe I do. Maybe I'm gonna need another double for my result, because I'm gonna have to multiply these two numbers, right? So I'm gonna create another variable for that. So let's go to the next step. I have declared my variables. Now it's my algorithm. So what is my algorithm here? That's the thing that we talked about in the beginning, right? So the first step is I have to communicate with my user, right? I have to tell the user that I need them to input a number. So I'm gonna do my console.writeline. I remember that from one of the videos. And I'm gonna have to have my double quotes because that's a string that I'm supposed to pass in here. And I'm gonna say something like, please input the first number. Cool. So I communicated a message to my user, and now I can expect the user to react, right? And the user will react by typing in a number. So I'm gonna have to do something like console.readLine, and I don't have to pass in any parameters into the readLine method. However, this alone won't do. We saw it in the last video that I have to be able to not only read the line, but save that information inside a variable. So what I'm gonna do here is say first number equals that. And look at that, I got my first error. What's happening here? So Visual Studio is actually a very smart tool. So whenever you get an error, you have the ability to just hover your mouse over that error, and Visual Studio will actually tell you what's wrong with that code, right? So in this case, you can see that it's saying cannot implicitly convert type string to double. Well, that makes sense. Remember I said everything the user types into the console is, in fact, a string. That's text. Well, now I have to kind of convert that text into a double. That's the only way that I'm gonna be able to use this double variable for this. So how do I do that? There are many ways that I can do it. Okay, so we're gonna talk about a couple of ways that you can convert these numbers. So the first would be to just do something like convert dot to double. And then that's a method that you're calling, and then because it's a method, you have to use parentheses. So look at that. Look at what we're doing here. Let me add some extra space here just so we can visualize things more clearly. So what I'm doing is I have my first number variable here, and I have an equal sign right next to it. And the reason for that is because I have to initialize this variable. I want to grab whatever the user typed into the console, and I want to save it. I want to save this information inside my first number variable. Okay. Now, again, because everything the user types into the console is a string, I have to convert that string into a number format, which in this case is a double. So I have to call the convert dot. And you can think of the convert. I won't get into a lot of details about what this is because, we're not going too deep for now. But you can think about the convert as a group of methods that are put together so that you can easily access them, right? And one of these methods is the toDouble. And the toDouble method converts a string into a double, okay? So because it's a function, you have to use your pair of parentheses here, and there is an argument, there is a parameter that you have to pass in. And that parameter is actually a string representing the number that you are trying to convert, okay? So it would be something like, for example, I could do double quotes because it's a string, and the number 5. It is the number 5, but it is the number 5 in a text format. It's not a string, it's not a number format that I can work with. Okay? So in this case, this works, and I would actually, as a result, get the number 5 as a double format, double data type, saved inside my first number variable. Okay? But I don't want to hard code the number 5 here. I actually want to get whatever the user typed in. And because of that, I need a method that grabs what the user typed into the console. And that's why I'm using the console read line. So the console read line is a method. It gives me a string, and that string holds whatever the user typed in. And I'm grabbing the result of that and passing in to the toDouble method, which converts a string into a double format. Okay? And that's how I convert data types. That's one way of doing it. And it's very straightforward. So this line in here, you have to really get used to it. Okay? So if you have to make a note, write it somewhere, because throughout this course, you are going to type this kind of things a lot. And this one particularly, you're going to type it multiple times, many times. You're going to be tired of it. So there you go. We grabbed our user input, we converted it to a double, and we stored it in the first number variable. Awesome. So let's do that to the second number. It's going to be the same thing. So console.writeline, and you can see the IntelliSense kicking in. Please input the second number. And now what I have to do is essentially do the same thing that I did with the first number, but for the second number instead. So second number equals to, and I could go on and do the same thing, convert.toDouble, and then console.readLine. That works, and that's a perfectly acceptable answer. But there are, as I said, there are other ways that we can convert numbers, right? If you're good with the convert.toDouble and you don't want to learn any other ways, that's totally fine. You don't have to know all the different ways. So if you don't want to, you don't have to. You can just close your eyes, stop listening to this video, and just come back in a couple of minutes. Now, for those of you who are actually interested in learning other ways, so this is for you. So I'm just going to comment this out. And what I'm going to do is just say double. This is the data type of my second number variable. Double dot parse. There's a parse method. And what the parse method does is exactly that. It parses whatever string you passed in as a double, right? So you can do the same thing here, console.readLine. And there you go. That works too. Okay, so these are two ways of converting data types, and it is actually the parse method. You can find the parse method, I think, for all other primitive types that we're going to talk about in this course. Okay, so if this were an integer, you could do just int.parse. If you were a Boolean, you would be able to do bool.parse. So we're going to do these kind of things later on. Okay, so for my algorithm, what I have so far is I asked the user for the first and second numbers, and I have two separate variables holding these two numbers. Awesome. So all I have to do now is multiply them. So let's go to the next line of code here, which will be the actual multiplication. So I can say something like result equals first number times. Now, if you want to do times, if you want to do multiplication, you have to use asterisk, second number, semicolon. So what's happening here now is I have my result variable, which I declared in the step above. I have an equal operator here, so that's an assignment operation. I'm assigning something into this result variable. And what is this something? That's the result of this mathematical operation. So that is how I can do mathematical operations with numbers in C#. Look at that. We learned something new. So first number, that's my first variable. It has a double now. And then we have the second number, which is another variable, which also contains a number now. And we're multiplying these, and the result of this operation is being saved in the result. Okay? So that's it for this step. Let's go to the next step. Step 3, and this is display the results. So now, that's very simple. We already know how to do that. So we can just say console.writeline. And now I'm gonna use my string interpolation because I want to be fancy. I'm feeling like a real programmer now, and guess what? You are a real programmer. So I'm gonna do my $, double quotes, and now that's how Visual Studio knows that I'm about to type in a special string. So what I'm gonna do is say the result of your multiplication is, and then I'm gonna throw in my placeholder. And inside this placeholder, I have to tell Visual Studio what variable I want to render in here. And that's going to be the value inside the result variable. Cool, look at that. It's done. Now, is there anything else? I don't think so. So let's run it. Okay, so this is what I have. The console came up, and let's throw in a first number. I'm gonna do 2. The second number will be 5. The result of your multiplication is 10. Look at that. Awesome. That's exactly what I was looking for. Let's test this application a little more thoroughly. What if let's run it again. So what if I provide a negative number? Let's try and break this application here. Let's say -1. And the second number, I'm gonna say 3.14. What do you guys think is gonna happen? Let's see. Oh, there you go. The result of your multiplication is -3.14. Cool. That's good. So it works. Now, in a real life situation, you would do lots of different things here to make sure that one, the user is typing in a valid input. So you are doing some validations, you are doing, maybe you are doing, you have some contour scenarios here that you have to add some extra code and make sure that, you know, different cases are treated individually and differently. But this is not the case. That, you know, we're not doing this here. We're keeping things simple, and this is kind of a simple concept that we talked about in this video, but you can explore this in so many different ways. Okay, now I just want to be a little fancier here, and what I want to do is do a console.writeline. Remember how in the last video we threw in some, like a dashed line in here? So I'm gonna do that again. So I want to do that, and again I'm gonna just copy my code because I don't want to type the same thing twice. So I'm just gonna copy and paste that, and this is what I'm gonna do. Look at that. Let's see what I get. Type in the first number. Let's say -5.27, and my second number will be, you know what, 0.1. The result of your multiplication is -0.527. Cool. So it seems my application works, and I'm happy with that. So this is what I had to cover with you in this course. There are some different mathematical operations that we are going to work with. It's not only about multiplications. So we're going to have to talk about operators. Here what we just did is asterisk, and I'm gonna say that this is the asterisk just to make sure everybody knows. Asterisk represents a multiplication operation, okay? And just as a side note, what I'm gonna say is that there are other operators that can be used for mathematical operations, and these are, of course, plus, minus. We have the multiplication here, but I'm gonna throw it in again just in case. And we have the division. Division is just a slash, okay? And there's another one. Some of you may have heard about this operator already. If you haven't, don't worry, we are gonna cover it in this course, but we're talking about the Modulus Operator. So if you don't know what this is, don't worry, we're gonna have another lecture that we'll talk about this. But essentially, in short, the modulus will return you the residue from a division. So if you divide 5 divided by 2, that's 2.5, right? But if you're working with integers only, that means 5 divided by 2 is actually 2, and the residue is 1, all right? So 5 modulus 2 would be equal to 1, okay? So we're going to talk about this in more detail, but in short, this is what you have to do. And you know, again, this is not a math class, so I'm not supposed to go into too deep about these things, but feel free to do your own research and, you know, learn more about the modulus operator before the next video. That's it. That's all I had. Thank you all, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Cheers.